The cost of a soldering iron has always been a major obstacle to youth getting involved in robotics. This soldering iron is available for 245 rands from Mantech. We're going to see if this soldering iron is capable of doing electronics grade work. We're going to be building out this little circuit here. We do have a complete video showing you how to build the line following module. We get everything nicely lining up. You want a 90-degree angle there. Rather don't start the soldering iron on the hottest temperature. Keep it on the lower temperature. You never want to leave a soldering iron switched on and unattended, so you switch it on and you start trying to tin the point. Okay, so we've got the soldering iron set on its lowest temperature. We are applying solder here, and the point has taken the solder very nicely. What you can do is wipe away the excess solder. So far this is looking pretty good, and now we can bring this soldering iron in there and we can apply some solder into that joint. Check that nothing has shifted, moved around, and pin the other side over there. It does say degrees Celsius, but I'm not too sure if that is a genuine read back from the tip thermometer dial, or if it's just hotter and colder on the heating element. We'll investigate this iron a little bit later on, but I'm quite pleased with the results so far. And I want to go in with a close-up camera. So now we're coming in here with this soldering iron, and you'll see that this soldering iron is plenty hot enough to get the job done, and that's on the lowest temperature. So that's pretty encouraging. And that's a wonderful join. That's not bad. If a soldering iron is too cold, the solder will form lumps and clumps, and it won't be terribly easy to work with. But if the soldering iron is too hot, that's also not great. Notice how we go in quite quickly and we get out quite quickly. So we're putting the phototransistors onto the line following modules printed circuit board. We're just putting them all in a row like so. So we're putting these parts on the board. We're not worried too much about their positions because that's a good test for the iron. So far, even for quite challenging joints, I've used the soldering iron on its lowest temperature setting. And I would advise you to, from the outset, set it to the lowest temperature setting and use it like that. Notice how I only soldered one leg of each of these parts, and they're standing all over the place. They're a bit skew here. So the trick now is to hold this module in your hand, hold the soldering iron in your other hand, and use one finger to push the part to where it's supposed to be by heating the leg of the part. So what you'll see is I've pushed that part into place. So the parts were roughly soldered in place just by one leg. Then we hold the module in our fingers like this. We reheat the leg of the part and we push the part in and up against the light baffle board. The first two are in place. Let's do the rest very quickly. So far this soldering iron is impressive. I'm just going to trim the legs of these parts away so it's not getting in our way while we finishing off this soldering job. The thing about soldering, folks, is it's a practical type of an activity. It's not something you read books about. You actually get a soldering iron, get some electronic stuff, and just get on with doing the soldering yourself. And the more soldering you do, the better it will get. So you can see this soldering iron is quite capable of getting in quickly, soldering the joint and getting out again. Having started soldering back in 1979, I'm actually very satisfied that this iron is worth every single cent of 245 Rand. If you go to their website, look up this number in the search field. Maybe the price that reflects on the website is a little bit higher, but if you email Nanda, he promised that the soldering iron would be made available to my students at 245 Rand, including VAT. One final test for me of an entry-level soldering iron would be to heat up a joint, maybe a bigger joint like that joint there. So with a big joint like that that goes through the board to the other side, if you want to remove parts, you need a pretty hot iron. I'm going to go up to maximum temperature and then just back a little bit to 400. I wouldn't advise running this iron in what I would call hot mode like that unless you have a very special reason to, like you want to remove a big part from a solder pad. But you'll see it's gone very, very hot. It's boiling the solder and the flux there. Why would you need a really hot soldering iron? Usually if you're doing repair work and you need to remove a big part that's soldered directly onto the circuit board, you need to get in there with a lot of heat, loosen up the part, get the part out and get out there before you destroy the printed circuit board. Don't leave soldering irons on all the time or overnight, because you'll come back and find that the tip is gone and then you've got to try and retin the tip, but you might end up with pitting on the tip, which is not great. Make sure the soldering iron is unplugged from the main supply because you can get a shock. You can undo here and remove these parts. This is quite nice because that is a standard tip. These are quite common and quite easy to obtain replacement tips. Undo this part here. Take your fingernail and you catch your fingernail under that part. It comes off relatively easy. Remove the circuit. Probably a little bit of a pull there and a bit of a push here. And be careful, this is the inside of the iron, pretty solid. This circuit that you're looking at is a mains dimmer circuit. What differentiates this iron from the iron that we reviewed previously, you've got a trimmer pot over there, and then you've got the main temperature adjustment over here. The circuitry over here is actually a mains dimmer circuit. Similar to in your dining room, you may have a switch on the wall with the dial, and you can turn down the brightness of the lamp. Most important to note, coming out of the heating element over here, you only have two wires. There's a wire there. If you turn it over, there's a wire there. Those wires are to the heating element. If you had four wires coming out, two wires coming out here, two wires coming out here, that would mean that you've got a temperature reading device, probably a K-type thermistor, inside of the ceramic heating element. But this entry-level affordable soldering iron doesn't actually have that feature. What that really means is this little temperature dial is not actually giving you a temperature. This soldering iron works on the idea that it's reasonably well thermally balanced. If you turn the temperature right down on this iron, don't operate it without the cover, you'll get a horrible electric shock which could be potentially lethal. If you turn it down, it's a really nice thermally balanced soldering iron. And if you turn it up to there, it's very, very hot. I wouldn't run it at that hot setting. You're going to damage your robot kit, you're going to damage printed circuit boards. You can always leave this iron on the coolest setting. I think at the price, at 245 Rands, it could well be the world's best soldering iron, because best is a relative term. The soldering iron that you see up on the screen right now, that would be my first choice. You just dial the temperature in. You can dial in 340 degrees, 360 degrees. If you're doing a job where you need extra heat, you can bump the heat up You have a real-time 7-segment LED digital display of the temperature, but at 1,800 Rand, that's quite a lot of money if you're just getting started in robotics. Maybe you would be better off spending your money on electronic parts, bits for your robot, Bluetooth modules to link your robot to the Internet of Things. A soldering iron like this is quite capable of doing excellent work if you are careful in the way you use it, if you wipe it on the sponge every time you pick it up, if you keep the temperature dial down low, and only turn the temperature up a little bit if the soldering iron looks like it's battling to heat up some solder on a bigger job where you've got a bigger lump of solder on the board. Mantic have made a genuine effort to find an affordable soldering iron that really is capable of doing electronics, and I can recommend the soldering iron for your club or for your school.